To the sound of the sea, the knights led the girl, warning her to be as offended as possible. If she saw any sign that Prince Ilid Orpheus Ketegan was going to get angry, she would run away from him immediately. She had not expected to meet the second prince like this. He was the one whom the entire empire hated and loved at the same time, and he was the one with whom she, as a maid, was not reciprocally in love. Now, he looked too horrible for someone who belonged to a noble family. This could mean that they hadn't found Ariadne yet. Manish and Ariadne were the one love of God. One of them had to be closer to God than to man. He had special powers that were extraordinary for an ordinary person. But Mamsha still needed a companion, and that was Ariadne. In this way, they immediately recognize each other, and a fateful love will arise between them. But for Manish, who cannot live without Ariadne, love was both a blessing and a curse. The girl was sure of only one thing. No matter how hard she tried, she would never be his companion. She was just one of the many candidates for the role of Ariadne. But that didn't mean she had to be something special for the prince, and she had known that for a long time. She told him that even if she was not the same Ariadne, she assured him that he would eventually find his Ariadne and that he should not worry. The girl still had only a fraction of a hope that she would succeed, so she assumed that if she really was his Ariadne, she could at least alleviate his suffering a little. The prince and the girl who came to his rescue suddenly saw lightning, so the knights thought he was angry again, so they had to move to a safer place. The lightning began to fade away as the girl found herself in the blonde man's arms. She was surprised and did not understand what had just happened. Finally, she was brought to her senses by the prince, who addressed her by name. He was glad to see her because she was the same Ariadne. He asked her why she had come so late, since he had only a few moments left before killing everyone in his vicinity. He turned to the girl, named Liana, and asked her not to leave him alone anymore while she was still in shock. The girl's memories of the day when it all started seemed very distant until now. On that day, there were musicians in the room who simultaneously played a beautiful melody that marked the beginning of the event. In the very center of the room hung a chandelier that looked magical, as it flickered like the sun on the summer solstice. As for the food, there were plenty of all kinds of luxurious and delicious appetizers and a large variety of soft drinks. The aristocrats were dressed in charming dresses and suits that fully emphasized which family they belonged to. Liana Theodore, who worked as a maid and silently watched from the corner of the room, was also present at the ball. Looking at all the attendees at the event, who were dressed in suits and dresses with lots of feathers, Liana could only assume that they looked like peacocks. Another maid, Deborah Cato, also came up behind her and said that she thought it was touching and wonderful. She wanted to hear Liana confirm her opinion. She also added that the royal banquets were, in her opinion, simply wonderful. They even provided them with chairs so they could sit down. Liana agreed with all of her interlocutors' statements, adding that she had heard that the ball would be luxurious, but she did not think it would be to that extent. In her opinion, the balls in the palace were different compared to others. Deborah agreed, because the first time she went to a ball like this, all she could think about was losing her eye from all the glitter. This was not her first ball, unlike Liana. Their lady, who was the second daughter of Earl Baldwin and whose name was Natasha, was very famous in high society. Deborah also noticed that the dress Liana had offered Natasha looked great on the count's daughter. Their lady stood out, despite the fact that there were many people in the room. Liana herself remarked that their lady looked charming because she was born that way, and the dress only slightly adorned her, like the rest of the clothes she would have worn. Turning her gaze to Natasha herself, Liana noticed that the woman was looking at her while she was talking to Prince Iliad. A little later, they decided to leave the place near the maids and go in a different direction. But Liana continued to feel like Natasha was looking at her for a while. A moment later, Deborah jumped up and shouted that she recognized the man who accompanied their lady as His Highness the Prince. After a moment, the two maids began to whisper to each other about the prince's beauty. Even from this distance, they could see how handsome he was. Deborah remarked that he was handsome enough to be the envy of the whole empire. She had heard many rumors that he made many women cry because of his looks. She knew the feeling, because she had never felt anything like it before in her life. She had never paid much attention to a person's appearance, But in this case, her eyes were already on him. Deborah approached Liana and whispered in her ear, asking if the maid didn't think their Lady Natasha looked very harmonious with Prince Elijah. The girl assumed this because it seemed to her that the second prince was interested in their lady. The girl could not help but agree to let her colleague pass, so she agreed in a few words. The bright platinum hair of the second prince was like sunlight, and the hair of their Lady Natasha was like precious wine. Together they looked as if they were from a painting, as if the most beautiful Pavlich had found a mate. While Liana was absorbed in her dreams and thoughts, Prince Ilid himself watched her closely, his eyes never leaving her. Deborah thought it was strange that His Highness Elijah was looking so intently in their direction, but Liana herself did not know the answer to this question either. At the moment she met his blue eyes, like glass beads, she thought that suddenly all the windows of the hall were open, as if a strong gust of wind had blown through. It was a very strange feeling, because her heart was beating so hard that she thought it would just about pop out of her chest. But by the time she raised her head again and looked toward the prince, she had already noticed him and Lady Natasha walking in the opposite direction. Perhaps this brief glance in her direction from the prince was only a kind of sign, but she did not know it at the time. Once they were outside the hall, the two maids began to speculate as to why Ilid was looking at them so intently. Deborah assumed that they just had something on their faces, but after remembering that they had been in the restroom, she suggested another option. Perhaps he only wanted to sit on the chairs occupied by the maids, but Liana did not understand the prince's intentions to sit on simple chairs. Deborah was not satisfied that she was the only one who was making guesses, so she ordered Evelyn to think about why the prince might be looking at them. Liana herself could not offer any guesses or reasons, so she wrote it off as a simple coincidence. She preferred to think so, because the feeling she had during that sudden glance was too rich for a maid like her. This was the most logical argument, so Deborah also agreed to it. She also didn't see the point of arguing so hard over such a trivial matter, because they had a bigger problem. These problems were related to their lady, because if His Highness was really interested in her, they were in big trouble. The second prince was known for his insensitive treatment of all his former companions, so Natasha is likely to be no exception. After their breakup, the maid's job will be to calm Natasha down, but it is better that she does not enter into this relationship and make them worry. The fame of this highness and Lida was not only due to his appearance, but also to the fact that he was a man born in the golden age of the empire, so he allowed himself too much. The period of his infatuation did not last long, namely from 2 weeks to 3 months. This was his so-called nickname, which fully described his personality. In the end, the maids had no choice but to hope that their lady would not be so interested in him. Liana was about to ask what Deborah thought about the matter, if the two really liked each other, but she suddenly fell silent. The reason for her sudden wedding was that she saw the two people they had just been discussing standing right in front of them. The prince said that he would soon be visiting Lady Natasha's apartment, so he asked her to vacate a bedroom for him, as she had promised. The lady was both amused and embarrassed by Ilyad's words, the way he tried to unceremoniously enter the bedroom of a noble lady. He recalled that the woman had promised to show him a tapestry that she said she had made herself, but that she might also have other magical items that she wanted to show the prince. These words made Lady Natasha even more embarrassed. Holding His Highness's hand, she could not stop laughing in embarrassment, which was all she could do. Lady Natasha and Prince Elijah looked rather touching, if not serious, but it was the servants who had to deal with the aftermath of the storm that these two noble people had caused. Even as he was saying goodbye, the prince hoped that Lady Natasha would respond to his letter of invitation, which he was going to send her, and she replied that she could not refuse him. The man said that Natasha had the right to refuse His Highness's proposals, because he hoped that she would make a choice, not because of pressure, but because of her true feelings. The prince's words seemed to Liana to be very untruthful, and therefore incorrect. It was obvious that if someone did not fall for this appearance, he could correct it with his words and vice versa. When the girl was thinking, she did not even notice that he had been looking at her all this time. She noticed it only after a while. Finally, Lady Natasha said that she would wait for a letter from the prince, and the carriage drove off, leaving the prince all alone. Liana tried to calm down, but she couldn't get the question out of her mind why she couldn't look away from him at that time. The maid's musings were suddenly interrupted by the lady herself, who said that Prince Elide had praised her dress, reinforcing that the woman had a very competent maid. Liana herself claimed that the reason this dress looks good on Natasha is because of her natural beauty. In this case, there was no need for exaggeration. Liana Theodore was a maid candidate recommended by Deborah. She was smart, so the woman was sure that Liana would serve her dutifully. This was a good reason to keep her. Deciding to test the true wit of one of her current maids, the woman called her over to ask if it was all fair. What Natasha meant by her words was that she and Lena were the daughters of commoners, but because Natasha had a different father, she lived a completely different life that Liana could only dream of. Natasha Baldwin was only half an aristocrat. Her biological mother took the place of a countess only because of her beauty, which Natasha inherited from her, in addition to her low birth. Knowing her weakness better than anyone else, Natasha always asked this question before choosing her personal maid. This question was the final one, and Natasha would either dismiss the maid to whom she asked this question or promote her to her personal maid. Liana had to choose a question that would definitely please Lady Natasha. The girl replied that she thought it was completely fair, because the lady was a lady, and she was herself. This answer seemed very boring to Natasha herself, because she had heard it from the previous maid, so she wanted to hear a more original answer today. Liana also added that she was completely satisfied with what she had now. The maid assumed that the lady might not understand her, but she was satisfied with the life she wanted to live. She was completely satisfied, and even more so, she liked the fact that she could feed her niece and go to bed with her in a warm bed. Liana didn't want to compare herself to other people, because by doing so, she would be despising the happiness she had now. She was not going to do something stupid like that. After some thought, Natasha remembered that Liana had mentioned earlier that her niece was 8 years old, and the maid herself said that her niece had indeed celebrated her 8th birthday last month. The carriage was silent again for a moment, before Natasha looked up at Liana again and told her that she would be coming to her room tomorrow. Once inside Lady Natasha's apartment, Liana was about to enter her room, but decided to look out a small window. As she had thought, even at this late hour, her room was still light and she could hear noise inside. These factors indicated that her niece was still not in bed. By opening the door with a loud scream and an angry expression, Liana frightened her niece, who was sitting with her back to the door, reading her book. A girl named Phoebe looked a little scared and confused. She knew that her aunt had not been very nice to her for disobeying her and staying up late reading. When Liana approached her niece, she immediately began to scold her for disobeying her request to go to bed early, but she claimed that she was going to do so. Picking up the book that had just fallen out of Phoebe's hands, the maid also noticed that she had told her not to read in the dark because it could damage her eyes. She found the book she was reading very interesting, and she wanted to see her aunt when she finished it, so she studied. Liana was curious about what her niece had been learning so far, so she opened the book she was holding, but was surprised because it was not an aristocratic primer. Phoebe said that she picked up the book when it was thrown into the incinerator and studied it. Her aunt was very surprised, because she did not think that a girl would be able to read it. Phoebe herself thought that the book had belonged to Angelica, but if she had thrown it away, it meant that she didn't like studying at all. Also in front of her niece, Liana remarked that it was not that difficult of a text, so she really did not see why Angelica found it so difficult. Liana asked again if Phoebe had found the text easy, to which she replied in the affirmative. Liana knew that Phoebe would grow up to be a very bright and intelligent girl, but at the moment that was very problematic given their situation. If Angelica herself finds out about her niece Liana's cleverness, she will cause a scandal, as she will think that Phoebe is pretending to study like an aristocrat. Of course, these words will be addressed to the little girl herself, so the woman will throw all this anger at Angelica, and Liana herself will hardly be able to say anything to the aristocrat. This could put Phoebe in danger, so Liana decided to make a promise to Phoebe that she would not break. Her aunt knew very well and was proud that her niece was so smart. But wherever the girl went, and especially in front of Lady Angelica, she was never to say that she knew the language of aristocrats. Liana explained that the lady might envy her, since Lady Angelica herself did not differ from others in her mind. After some thought, Phoebe accepted the promise because there was nothing she could do about it, only to keep her promise because she was smarter. Liana confirmed the child's words and said that she was a smart girl, so she had to keep it a little secret and that she swore on her little fingers. After making the promise, Aunt Liana told her niece to go to bed, but Phoebe offered to read a book to her aunt. In the morning, Liana Theodore was met by her colleague, Deborah, who greeted her as their Lady Natasha's personal maid, giggling as she did so. The girl mentioned this for the 10th time in one day, so it was starting to get annoying, and she asked her to stop. Deborah was only amused by her colleague's remarks, and she made a point of saying that she thought it was the 100th, so she would have to repeat it 90 more times. Behind Deborah appeared Count Baldwin's eldest daughter and Natasha's older sister, Angelica, whose presence Liana noticed and hurried to inform the maid. Deborah's face showed real fear, her voice trembled, and her body refused to move in fear. She realized what Angelica was about to do, and that was what scared her. Before she could apologize, Angelica hit Deborah in the face with such force that she fell to the floor before she could even apologize. Already trying to regain consciousness, Deborah did not look up when Angelica made comments to her about her inability to behave appropriately. She was not facing her colleague or friend, so she had to know where she was and behave according to the requirements of the owners. Perhaps this language was due to the fact that Deborah was serving a commoner. A moment later, the maid was at the hem of Lady Angelica's luxurious dark purple dress, apologizing for her behavior, which had been too rash. Averting her guilty gaze, Liana felt embarrassed that she could not do anything for her friend. In fact, none of the maids who belonged to the Baldwin family could do anything for themselves or their colleagues without being treated in a similar manner. Being a maid of a low-class aristocrat was a real punishment. Such maids had to behave as if they were not there, as if they were invisible. Even if the closest colleague is being punished by the lady and criticized, everyone else should just stay in the party and watch in silence. Although such behavior was rude and inhumane, it was the privilege of those who held great power, which they were not afraid to use. As Angelica approached Liana, she immediately recognized her as her younger sister's new personal maid. The lady also noticed that Liana was quite pretty. Angelica said that Natasha had chosen her only to use her appearance when she needed it. In addition to these rather unpleasant words, which the maids were already used to hearing from Angelica, this lady also added that the child Liana was taking care of was ugly. When Liana began to talk about Lady Natasha, whom she serves, Angelica interrupted her by asking if she really thought her younger sister was a lady. Angelica did not think that Natasha deserved the title of lady, because she was an incomplete human being, the daughter of the woman who became a countess in exchange for her looks. Lady Angelica did not care at all that Liana was personally Natasha Baldwin's maid. With an excessive expression on her face, she really did not see the point in the maid's words. The girl explained that from now on, when she was Natasha's personal maid, her ears belonged not only to her, but also to her lady. The words she had just heard Angelique say were to be passed on to her younger sister, if Madame cared to hear them. Instantly, Angelica's face became confused after the words that came out of Liana's mouth. She asked the maid to repeat what she had just said, as if expecting to hear something else. The girl repeated what she had just said, but also added that she was sorry if it sounded too rude to Angelique. But as Lady Natasha's personal maid and the maid of this estate, she decided to ask Angelique's opinion first, so as not to cause unnecessary trouble. Concealing her anger, Lady Angelica called to one of the maids behind her and asked her to bring the whip that her father had recently purchased, namely, yesterday. Behind the lady, one of the maids also heard the voice of one of the maids trying to convince the lady not to do it, but Angelica herself was already in a bad mood, so they could get hurt themselves because of their desire to protect Liana. Angelica's face changed instantly, and one could really tell that she had lost the smile on her face and was serious. Nevertheless, one of the maids resisted the urge to help her colleague, and the other agreed to bring the whip, commenting that she would go get it right away. Angelica had already missed that her sister Natasha would be heartbroken over her personal maid, whom she had just chosen yesterday, and today she would simply disappear. As Angelica continued her speech about how the girl was trying to succeed only through her face, Just like Natasha, she did not notice her sister suddenly appear behind her. Count Baldwin's second daughter appeared in front of the maids and her older sister in a gorgeous white dress. Her face showed no anger toward her sister because of what she had just said. Natasha only smiled warmly. Natasha explained her sudden appearance by saying that she had given her maid something to do, but after a long absence she decided to check what was wrong. As she spoke, she extended her hand to one of them. Natasha did not expect her older sister to punish her personal maids, but she claimed that she would never do such a thing without a reason. Angelica explained her behavior by saying that she wanted to teach the very inexperienced maids to behave in accordance with the requirements of the Count's family through punishment. Natasha herself did not consider punishment to be an effective form of influence on the experience of their maids, so she considered this training useless. Angelica ignored all her sister's words because she thought it was the right thing to do. If Natasha didn't want to be like her mother, she should have at least taught them the basics in time. With a skeptical and calm face, she didn't understand what her mother was involved in this dialogue, but she knew that Angelica just wanted to find something to argue about so that she wouldn't be on the losing end of this little argument. Everyone had known for a long time that Natasha's mother was a rather intelligent woman, but for Natasha herself, these rumors were something new, because usually her mother was not discussed in a very good way. Even through this reasoning, Angelica knew that Natasha had to be ashamed of her mother. This was not good, because no matter how dirty this method was, Natasha had inherited a lot from her mother. But in fact, her second sister was even grateful for it. It was moments like this meeting with Angelica that gave Natasha the opportunity to shine with her mind. She recalled that a lady had once said that it was certainly immediately obvious that Lady Angelica and Lady Natasha had different mothers. For Lady Angelica, this was not a surprise, because in her opinion, her mother with a great history was easy to separate from an ordinary person. Natasha ignored everything Angelica said and continued. She said that she had heard from people who thought that the two sisters were separated from each other from head to toe, especially in terms of mental abilities. Angelica was outraged by these words, but her younger sister did not stop trampling her in the mud. People kept asking Natasha how her sister could not even know the basic spelling of the language of the kingdom of Atela. Laughing quietly, Natasha also noted that if she were her sister, she would at least try to learn the language, if only out of shame. But it seemed to be difficult for her. Natasha was literally shaking with anger and shame at her younger sister's criticism, trying to find the right words and respond with something. Eventually, the lady could not stand the tension any longer, so she turned around and commented on Natasha's behavior, saying that she was acting like a child. Liana was relieved that Lady Natasha had arrived on time, because if she had been only a few minutes late, it would have been too late. Deborah had to apply for a short vacation on the recommendation of Lady Natasha, and as a result, Liana had to take on the responsibility of serving the lady in the garden of the imperial palace. Arriving at the place where she was to wait for further instructions, Liana was worried about Deborah. Her only thought was that her colleague would be okay. Suddenly, Liana's thoughts were interrupted by the maid who had been present when Lady Angelica scolded her. She ran up to her saying that Liana had really impressed her today. The maid, named Annie, was particularly impressed by how confidently Liana stood up to Lady Angelica, even though she could have fired her, or worse. Lena herself said that she hadn't said anything like that, only the truth, but it still seemed very brave to Annie. She was really happy to see it all. Recalling this situation, Liana did realize that she was not in a very favorable position for herself at the time, but she had no other choice. At the moment she faced Lady Angelica, she looked up to see Lady Natasha watching the whole situation through the window. It doesn't matter, even if it could show her loyalty to the lady and help her keep her job as Natasha's personal maid. This was a direct proof that Liana would always remain on her side against all odds, as her main goal was to become a personal maid for Lady Natasha, whom she would take with her after the marriage. Her concern was no longer for herself, but for Phoebe's comfort. She could have gotten that if she had remained Lady Natasha's maid. Of course, she wanted to take revenge on Angelica for Deborah, but she herself told her niece that she was smarter. Liana also wanted to ask Annie if she had ever seen Prince Iliad before, and she replied that she had seen him for the first time today. In Annie's maid's opinion, he was too magical for this world, so she was glad that she was taken instead of Deborah today. Annie also looked toward the center of the garden where Prince Elijah and Lady Natasha were sitting. She also noticed that they were perfect for each other, because they looked perfect together. The maid also honestly hoped that His Highness's words were frank and that he had serious plans for Lady Natasha. Liana herself hoped for this, because when she might work in the imperial palace, being not so far from the maids, Lady Natasha noticed at once that His Highness's eyes were fixed on the same maid as last night. The woman asked Ilyad if he liked her maid, whom he was looking at so intently all the time, as if not noticing the presence of the lady herself near him. The man's words indicated that he only wanted to compliment her because she still adorned her lady so beautifully. It was very dangerous to dress up like that just to walk through the garden, because in this way, Natasha could easily get the envy of the nymphs. She herself replied that she did not want to hear anything from a man who was the envy of the entire empire. There were a lot of violets in this garden. Natasha herself would have preferred to plant more colorful flowers, because it was the garden of the palace. Iliad said that his mother liked violets because she compared them to the prince himself, so she cherished them very much. It reinforced the image of the whole family, because purple was considered the color of the emperor, so it made sense. Having picked one of the violets from a large garden, the woman added that perhaps Prince Iliad's mother had compared him to a violet because it was a surprisingly strong flower. All this time, Natasha did not have a good opinion of Linda. She considered this maid to be a dependent child, but time has shown that this girl knows exactly when to show her confident and strong side and when to keep quiet. This is what made Natasha interested in her. Natasha was sorry that a maid as good as Liana had not fallen into her hands much earlier, and she was sad that she would have to say goodbye to her lady after her work. Coming a little closer to Natasha, Prince Iliad said that he did not care whether others envied him or not, because it was not his style to envy others. It was not the main thing for him. Eventually, deciding to change the subject, Iliad suggested that they talk about something other than the maid, and Natasha asked him if he was sure he wanted to help her. He took Natasha's hand in his and brought it to his face, stating without a doubt that Natasha's help was equally important to Prince Iliad himself. Once Natasha is able to bring the evidence into his hands, he will be able to destroy the Baldwin family, as the lady herself wishes. Looking at the map of the imperial residence, the girl tried to figure out where she was and the room she needed to get to. Simply put, she was lost. Liana did not know that no matter how urgent her business was, she should not have left her luggage in the carriage, but thanks to Annie telling her, she decided to go back to get it and ended up getting lost. Wandering the corridors of the palace, she saw no one, so she had no one to ask for directions. In order to return, she had to find at least a guard. Finally, Liana saw the maids of the imperial palace in front of her, so she assumed that she could ask them for directions. Liana apologized to the maids and told them that she was a maid from the Baldwin family, but that she was now a little lost among the similar walls of an unknown palace. Behind the maids of the palace, a familiar voice was heard, belonging to Iliad, who heard an unfamiliar voice claiming to be a member of the Baldwin family. For a moment, Liana forgot which palace she was in, because she was surprised by the sudden appearance of His Highness before her eyes. The girl introduced herself according to etiquette, and the prince wanted to get down to business, so he hurriedly finished with his greeting. He wanted to know what she was doing in his palace. He thought that Natasha had sent the girl, but this was not the case. Liana stated that she got lost on the way to the warehouse and approached other maids because she wanted to ask them for directions. The girl looked very confused at the sight of the prince, so he noticed it at once and said that her story was enough. So he went on to say that she had come on time and he had an errand to run for her. Recalling the outfits Liana had made for Lady Natasha, the prince also wanted to see her skills, so he asked her to pick out clothes for him. Upon entering the large dressing room, the Baldwin family maid asked Prince Iliad what event he wanted her to choose clothes for. He was planning to wear this outfit to dinner tonight, so he wanted to know what Lady Natasha's preference was. Liana immediately understood His Highness's thought process, so it was assumed that he had asked her to dress him up so that he would look good in front of Lady Natasha. It is clear that Liana was only a maid for him, so his appearance before her was fully consistent with his attitude. Shaking herself out of her thoughts, Liana said that Lady Natasha prefers her clothes to look formal. Most of all, she likes the man's clothes to look neat and modest, rather than something more colorful. The man asked the maid which ones she liked, but she replied that her preferences were very similar to Lady Natasha's, so she repeated herself. To summarize, Prince Ilid wanted the maid Liana to give him a clear answer to his question about what clothes he should wear now in her own opinion. After some thought, Liana had several ideas in her head that she could already turn into reality, and she quickly started to implement them. A moment later, Ilid appeared in the clothes that Liana, the maid, had picked out for him. He asked her if his finished look was too uninteresting. In Leon's opinion, the prince looked irresistible in this classic vest and similarly classic pants with a white shirt. Looking at herself in the mirror, Leon's face didn't look too pleased, so she assumed that he didn't like the end result she showed him. Looking to the side, she noticed something that, in her opinion, completely completed the man's image and added color to his rather simple and classic suit. In her hands was a charming brooch with a deep blue stone. This small but significant detail, which definitely attracted attention, completely eliminated the image of boredom. Putting a bright brooch on the prince's frog, she carefully adjusted it, making some touches that would make his look neat. Looking at himself in the mirror, he was finally satisfied with the work of his maid, Natasha Baldwin. He looked at his reflection with pride, as if he had chosen the clothes himself. Turning to the girl, he thanked her, for she had done her work with excellence and had confirmed all his expectations, that indeed she was the creator of all his companions. She bowed, saying that it was an honor to help the prince. Just as she was about to leave the room, she was suddenly called out. The prince said that it would be very nice to have a maid like her in his palace, so he was sorry that such a treasure already belonged to Natasha Baldwin. Now she could not help but leave the room, so she ran out as quickly as possible. All the rumors that people had heard about the prince were quite true, for he spoke very well. Recalling the entire conversation with His Highness, the girl began to run away, as if from her own thoughts. She told herself that she was not running away because of the prince. She tried to convince herself that her heart was only beating so hard because of running. A girl stumbled on a flat spot and fell loudly, unable to escape her own thoughts. She sat on the floor and did not get up, because she felt very strange. Sitting on the red-carpeted floor, Liana could not find a logical explanation for all the sensations that made her feel terribly uncomfortable. She was sure that anyone in her position would have been nervous as well. Prince Ilid was the noblest man in the empire for whom she was choosing clothes. Suddenly, a hand was extended to the girl sitting on the floor. She gladly took it and thanked them for their help. The owner of this hand was a man who asked the girl if she had been crying. He wanted to know the reason for her tears, so he asked her if she was okay. The girl missed that the man was from the kingdom of Itala, based on his accent. She quickly realized what he wanted, so she replied that she was perfectly fine and thanked him for his concern. The man missed that the girl needed treatment, but she assured him that it was nothing. She refused as gently as possible, but quickly because she had lost a lot of time and was sure that the ladies were already waiting for her. The girl continued to refuse when she heard that it was an unidentified man who offered to go to his room to treat her. She thanked him, but said that she had no more time to waste. Tugging at the sleeve of her uniform, he continued to claim her room, but she continued to refuse. Her tone was not so gentle now, and she began to assert her boundaries. For Liana and the culture of her empire, it was abnormal to invite a stranger to her room, even if it was within the norm where the man came from. It did not mean that everyone had to listen to him. She argued that if he did come to the empire, he should study its culture, not rely on his own. In the end, the girl was extremely angry. She said that it was none of her business, and she should have left. Leaving an unknown person, she thought it was disgusting and saw no point in being nice, because everyone should have an understanding of norms. As it turned out, the man could not explain that he was lost because of his accent, so the misunderstanding was not because the man really had disgusting intentions, it was because he simply did not know the language well. While looking for a book about Ariadne and Manish, Liana eventually found one on the shelves of the Baldwin family library. It was a book that Phoebe had read before in aristocratic language. There was nothing wrong with that, but Liana decided to check out what her niece was reading anyway. At the beginning of the book, there was a god who was so lonely that he created a creature to be with him. This creature was Manish. God blessed him with his power and created for him a great number of people who all loved him, but not as much as his creator. One could say that Manish was his favorite. However, Manish himself, relying on God's power and blessings, became increasingly arrogant. The name of one of the blessings God gave him was disappearance. His words could wipe out anything, so Manish gladly used this power. Just for his selfish pleasure, Manish killed many people. Manish was the first human being created by God. Everyone loved him, but Manish himself loved no one. God realized that it was his fault that he had created Manish so lonely, so he was ready to take responsibility for that too. God kept his word and created Ariadne, a beautiful girl whom Manish was able to love. This was his retribution and manifestation of responsibility for making his creation lonely. Manish soon realized that the blessing his creator had given him was a real curse. The sharp 5 senses should pierce his whole body. The sound of talking, his own breathing, or any rustling should cause him unbearable pain. And Ariadne turned out to be his salvation. It was when he touched her that he could breathe freely and deeply. She was his savior and goddess, because without her, he could not live. Anyone who saw this understood the name of the last blessing that the Creator bestowed upon him, and that was eternal love. As Liana closed the book, she thought that no matter how legendary this story might be, it might seem very cruel to a little girl like her niece. Moreover, she did not think that Manish would appear in the next 70 years. Suddenly, a familiar voice was heard outside the room, belonging to Lady Angelica. The woman was shouting loudly to her brother about how much she had been offended by her sister's actions regarding the situation with the maid. When she looked outside the room, she did indeed see Lady Angelica and young Mr. Percival. Her wife was really not in the best of spirits, and her brother just had to listen to it all. If they noticed her, they would probably think she was eavesdropping on them, and then she would not have Lady Natasha to rescue her, so she decided to hide behind the wall, hoping that they would end their conversation quickly. Hearing only fragments of their conversation, Liana decided that they were probably talking about a recent incident. A moment later, Mr. Percival informed her that very soon this person would not be able to set foot in the mansion. The maid was frozen with shock and surprise when she heard that either she or her Lady Natasha would be thrown out of the house for an unknown reason. Today was Phoebe's birthday, and she had a huge cake with lots of cream and berries. It was her day, so she was surrounded by attention. Everyone took a piece of cake, but since it was the kid's birthday, she got 2 pieces. Once everyone had received a piece of cake, they quickly began to eat it, and Aunt Phoebe Liana was no exception. Deborah leaned over to the girl and noticed that she had a very sad expression on her face. It was Phoebe's birthday, so Liana shouldn't spoil her mood with her sad face. Liana apologized because she was just thinking. She had a lot on her plate, and the information she had accidentally heard that she might not be in her position for long, or that her lady would be jeopardized, which would cause her to lose her job as well, really gave her food for thought. One of the women sitting across from the girl asked her if she was tired at her job. She offered to stay in their hotel, and since there were quite a few empty rooms, her husband agreed, reinforcing the fact that the door of their home always remained open for Liana. With a smile on her face, the girl said that as soon as Phoebe got a little older, she would move in with them. In fact, they needed a little more money to rent a room in this hotel, and if the owners of this hotel found out about Liana's circumstances, they would immediately provide the most favorable conditions. This would have been a very good solution, of course, but Liana could not take advantage of their open kindness, so she always put the move off for later. Suddenly, a boy who was also sitting at the same party table said that he had prepared a gift for Phoebe by asking the little girl if she liked dolls. A moment later, a large plush rabbit that looked like a doll appeared in Phoebe's hands. She spun with it, lifting it just above her head. Aunt Phoebe was very grateful to the boy named Matthew for always giving them things. She didn't even know how she could agree to receive these things for free. Matthew attributed all these gifts to the fact that Phoebe was also partly his niece, So her aunt had to accept all his gifts with a clear conscience, while Deborah, sitting at the table, understood the real reason for these gifts. A moment later, a plan popped into her head that could tease Matthew and make him a little nervous. She took it as a good opportunity for fun, so she immediately suggested. By looking into the box, which was also on the table, Deborah made her brother very nervous. His face was already covered with a slight blush, but now he felt much more embarrassed. Of course, Deborah understood that this gift was intended for Liana, but she said to others that it was most likely intended for Phoebe as well. When Phoebe tied a beautiful blue ribbon in her hair, everyone immediately began to wonder how cute she was after all. The ribbon made her look even more beautiful and suited her very well. While everyone stood around Phoebe with warm smiles on their faces because of her appearance, Matthew sat at the table, making the atmosphere in his corner very gloomy. The children ran up to Matthew and thanked him for the nice gifts of a cute rabbit and a magic ribbon. She stated that she liked Uncle Matthew very, very much, and this was not only because he gave her gifts. Matthew could not respond with something negative or sad, which instantly ruined the birthday girl's mood. He said that he also liked the girl, although he said it with a very inappropriate face. As Deborah and her parents walked home, she asked Liana if she had had fun at her niece's birthday party. The girls liked these small gatherings in a warm circle. Suddenly, Phoebe woke up behind Linda, but her aunt suggested that she sleep a little longer on her back. The girl woke up quickly and did not look too sleepy. She said that she needed to say something in her aunt's ear. Leaning slightly toward Liana, Phoebe told her that all the things she had said at Aunt Deborah's house were not serious, and that she liked her Aunt Liana more than anything else in the world. The girl responded in kind, saying that she also liked her niece Phoebe more than anything else in the world. Even when the girl fell asleep on the girl's back again, she also spoke warm words to her. The book Phoebe read in aristocratic language may have been a book that Lady Angelica threw away not because she didn't want to learn, but because the Baldwins were up to something. Recalling Lady Angelica's conversation with her brother, Lady Angelica herself omitted that Benjamin Owen would marry this commoner, but her brother said that she would marry his father. Lady Natasha knew nothing about this, so Liana had to find a way to save her and stay on as her personal maid. Writing to Liana, Annie said that no matter how much she thought about her assumptions, this time they were definitely true. This was due to His Highness and the lady, and there had never been a case of a prince visiting the estate in person. All this was so unexpected and interesting for Annie. All this was leading up to his falling in love with their Lady Natasha. All the tracks in their relationship converged to this point, and almost all the maids were watching, expecting an interesting development in the future. Still, Liana could not help thinking that if he really liked Lady Natasha, he would have to come to meet her in a formal outfit. All of this led the girl to believe that Prince Elide had come to dinner in different clothes than the ones Liana had chosen for him. In response to her colleague's words, Liana replied that she would not be so sure in her place, as it was still His Highness with his dubious reputation. Through a blur, Liana said that she was going to visit the gardener now, because it looked like it was time to change the centerpiece. As she left the room, she began to think that as soon as she was done helping the gardener, she would go right away to help the other maids clean up. After that, she has to help her Lady Natasha with her hair and complete her look for today, which will also include her pearl earrings. Suddenly, Lady Angelique, with whom Liana had not wanted to cross paths today, also appeared in the corridor. It seemed that Madame was also in a bad mood today. This is understandable, since today His Highness will personally arrive at the estate to see the young Lady Natasha, which of course made Lady Angelica jealous. Determined to walk carefully and quickly beside Lady Angelica, she did not even notice Madame tripping her up because of the puffy hem of her dress. A moment later, the girl found herself on the floor, all wet. She had to do something about the water and the carpet that had been spilled. With an evil smile, Lady Angelica commented on her action by saying that she did not know whether Liana would be able to cope before His Highness arrived, as cleaning was not her job. It turned out that ordinary maids who were not even involved in the incident would be punished and given additional work. All this time, Liana remained silent, so the woman began to vent her anger at her even more, because she wanted her to show her authority. Deciding that apologizing for her clumsiness would be the easiest way to say goodbye to Lady Angelica, She broke the silence she had kept all this time. Lady Angelica immediately realized that it was a common bluff and became bored in an instant. So she decided to walk away from the maid, who was not worth even a minute of her attention. Finally, the girl got up from the floor and sighed sadly, because she had just washed all her clothes yesterday and now she simply had no time for anything. The best thing to do now was to change into something cleaner. Looking at her hand, which Lady Angelica had stepped on with her heel a moment ago and continued to press, she made sure that it was fine and could still use it. This time, Lady Angelica did not beat Liana or openly mock her for a long time, but only stepped on her hand, which remained almost unharmed, so the girl was glad for that. Convincing herself that it was just a trifle, the girl moved forward because she had no time to pay attention to such things. Showing His Highness a vase made of genuine porcelain, Count Baldwin remarked that it was a rare object made after the night motifs of the Etal Desert. Some say that only 200 of these pieces have survived throughout the empire, which is certainly not comparable to the imperial family. Prince Ilyad thought it was an excellent piece, but he also noted that he was well aware of how many similar pieces of pottery were in the Baldwin household and how they came to be there. But in the meantime, the prince claimed that there were other works of art in the room that he should have known about, which meant that the count and his children should get out of the room as soon as possible. Eventually, his companion, Lady Natasha, came to the room where the prince was staying and commented that she had not really expected him to agree. He replied that he had never let her down before, so this time it shouldn't happen. Besides, she knew that the prince always kept his word. It turned out that, according to their agreement, neither of them should lie to the other, so Natasha also had to keep her promise to Prince Ilid earlier. She came closer to him, holding the bundle of evidence behind her back that she had promised to find for Ilid. He stretched out his hands to her, as if to hand Natalia to her, but it was only to take the desired bundle in his hands. Lady Natasha confirmed his guess and said that if he wanted to, he could look at them right now. As the prince looked closely at the contents of the bundle Natasha had given him, he noticed something strange in the text, so he decided to ask the lady about it. As far as he understood, hallucinogenic drugs were being smuggled out of Attila, and the Marquis Owen was continuing this path himself. But this was more evidence of the betrayal of the Marquis Owen himself, not the Duke of Baldwin, which he expected. Natasha herself noted that a deal had recently been struck between these families, with the Baldwin family signing an exclusive contract with a trading company run by Marquis Owen. When this contract and agreement come into force, it will be potential evidence of Mr. Baldwin's involvement in smuggling. His Highness called this deal very unfavorable, because if he were the Marquis, he would have chosen much better options than the Baldwin family. But in the end, this plan did not matter, as both of these families would be destroyed based on their own recklessness. The prince had to prepare several contingency plans in case the plan of the two families changed, but he also asked his interlocutor Natasha to double-check the information about the plan. The plan that Natasha has been preparing for all these years will eventually come to fruition, and now that it is over, her main and long-held wish will finally come true. Peering through the door leading to the street, the prince noticed that all the maids were busy running around outside the prominent room in which Ilid was staying. It was still too early to change the sheets, so the man realized that they were here because of his presence. It would have been bad if His Highness had not met all the expectations of most of the maids, but it was a pity that they were all busy cleaning the sheets at the moment. At the same time, Liana was scared, because she did not know what she was supposed to do. This was her first experience as a personal maid, so everything looked very unusual and a little scary to her. Suddenly, the bell rang, signaling that Liana was to enter her Lady Natasha's room. She was already thinking about a plan in her head for her next steps as she entered the room. When the girl entered Lady Natasha's room, she saw His Highness the Prince, who was equally surprised to see her again. The man also added that he did not even expect Liana to be in such a position so early. She was surprised that His Highness was still in Lady Natasha's room. She had heard that he usually left after his personal maid arrived, but it would have been rude not to greet the prince. The girl was about to be given warm water, so the prince took this as a good opportunity to seize the moment and wash his own hands. It would have been terribly rude to refuse him, so the girl could do nothing but serve the prince first. Deciding not to keep the room quiet, Ilid asked the maid if she had eventually found her room in the imperial palace on the day she had gotten lost. Fortunately, the girl reported that she had solved this small problem with the help of a lady who kindly showed her the way. Wiping his hands on a towel held by the maid Liana, the prince was pleased to hear that the girl was not confused and went on looking. He noticed the maid's tie, which was dirty, and he drew attention to it. Of course, he was not very knowledgeable about the duties of maids, but he knew that personal maids were not supposed to clean up. She didn't notice it at all when she was rushing to Natasha's room, but Ilid's eyes were quite sharp. She apologized for this, but he said that she shouldn't apologize to him for this. He left the room with the words, "She should take care of her lady Natasha and be more attentive to details in the future." With her face buried in a towel, the girl hid her blush, which appeared as a result of her embarrassment at her clumsy behavior. When Liana stood behind her lady Natasha and showed her her earrings, Natasha's face was not entirely satisfied, so she assumed that she simply did not like them. The woman herself, who was not in the best of spirits, replied that the earring satisfied her, and that her expression was due to the fact that she was thinking. In fact, Natasha's thoughts were preoccupied by the prince's strange behavior. Before the maid arrived, he spilled milk tea on the bed for some unknown reason, claiming that their clothes were dirty, and it would be strange if the bed remained clean. Although it was strange, it was better than the prince's previous attitude toward Natasha. They had to maintain at least a similar relationship until they found more evidence. When Liana had almost finished decorating Lady Natasha, she told her that she had something to say to the woman. She was very unsure and afraid that Natasha would not understand her. A moment later, Liana said with a confused face that when she went to the library on the same day as her niece's party, she overheard a young man talking to Madame Angelique. She realized that it was rude of her, but she could not just leave because it concerned her lady Natasha. With a surprised face and rounded eyes, Natasha turned her gaze to her own maid and decided to hear the truth about this little conversation. She summarized all the words she had heard Liana say, that Marquis Arnold Owen wished to marry Count Baldwin's second daughter. Liana herself also said that she had heard that the Marquis Owen's family had a firm grip on the jewelry business, so Madame wanted to take over everything in this way. Lady Natasha herself had heard that the Marquis of Owen was to be married to the Marquis. Thinking about it, she realized that it was not just a trade deal. Recalling Ilid's words that if he had been in the Marquis's shoes, he would have chosen the option of the Baldwin family, and analyzing all these words, the woman realized that this was only the result of her sale. She thanked Liana for being able to get such valuable information for her and told her that it was a really good job. The girl replied that she was only doing her duty. After a moment, the woman asked what Liana would do in her place. This confused the girl a bit, but she couldn't keep silent, so she thought about it for a while and answered. She said with a serious face that if she were her lady, she would agree to make an alliance with the second son of the Marquis of Owen. Lady Natasha was a little surprised because Liana even knew the Marquis's sons. Moreover, she even knew his name, but she didn't remember it exactly. She just missed that his name was Benjamin Owen. After a moment, the woman asked where she had heard the name, which was also correct. Liana replied that when she heard about the wedding, Madame Angelique asked her brother if her sister would marry Benjamin Owen. In fact, that was not why she was asking. She was wondering how she knew that the young gentleman had sent her a letter, since Owen had secretly betrayed her earlier. Without knowing about it, the girl proposed to make an alliance with him, so it was a bit strange. The girl agreed to it, but she didn't think he would be interested. As soon as she heard the Marquis's name, Madame immediately thought of Benjamin's name. She and her brother were talking about the Marquis's second son, so she said so. Recalling all the words that came out of Lady Angelica's mouth, it was noticeable that young Mr. Benjamin showed great interest in Lady Natasha. Starting from the assumption that the Marquis was in love with Natasha, Liana suggested that it would be a good idea to declare an official relationship with him. After that, the Marquis himself would definitely not have been able to marry the girl who was publicly announced as his son's official companion. Noticing Lady Natasha's scrutiny, she added that this was only her personal opinion and that the lady's final decision was up to her. Because of all the above, Lady Natasha had a very good impression of the girl. The lady herself had a contract with His Highness, but she could suddenly break it and change her mind. All her thoughts about the true value of this maid were true, so she did not want to let her go into other hands and was not going to. Now in a good mood, having received such valuable information, the lady approached the door, calling Liana after her. On her way to the door, she remembered what she had also wanted to tell her personal maid. She turned to face her and smilingly told her to look forward to this month's paycheck. The girl was very happy to hear her lady's words because it meant that she could think about finding a room even earlier. As they arrived in Prince Ilid's carriage, they talked about how Lady Natasha was late again today. Now there were few excuses for the prince about the broken watch. In the carriage house, Liana was glad that she had told the truth to Lady Natasha. It was not for the sake of money, but for the sake of the lady's happiness and safety, although she was no less happy about the money. Turning to face the girl, Deborah asked her if they were really traveling separately from Lady Natasha. In this case, they were sure they would be able to talk the whole trip. The girl confirmed this, commenting that their lady and Prince Elijah would have a good time together during the trip, but Liana was suddenly called out. Liana looked around and saw that a lady was calling her. Calling her personal maid closer to her, the woman ordered her to get into the imperial carriage. When asked again, Liana was shocked, but Natasha said that she would like her maid to ride in the same carriage as her. Lady Natasha's proposal was understandable, for in order to approach Benjamin Owen, she needed to confirm that her relationship with His Highness Elijah was not serious. It will be much easier to show this if you demonstrate that they were not in the carriage together, dispelling all the rumors, so the girl had to agree. The imperial carriage was too luxurious for an ordinary maid, so she felt very uncomfortable, especially when there were other aristocrats in it. The prince was no longer surprised to see Natasha's maid again, so he openly stated this. The girl herself only replied in a more gentle manner, observing all the rules of etiquette. Having already set off in the carriage, the prince decided not to keep the atmosphere inside the carriage tense by remaining silent. So he noticed that it was the first time he had seen a maid not in a maid's uniform, so he assumed that she had chosen it herself. It was true. Liana had chosen these clothes for herself, but she thought it was a little strange that he had asked her about it, since he was supposed to be talking to Lady Natasha. Her lady certainly wasn't the kind of person who would get angry for talking to her companion, but there is always an if clause in cases like this that can change a perfectly safe situation into the opposite direction. Unexpectedly, Lady Natasha reacted to His Highness's question about whether Liana had changed her mind about working in his palace. Returning to her personal maid, the woman asked her if she had heard Ilid's words, to which she replied in the affirmative. The girl thanked His Highness with a serious face for such words, but replied that she would like to finish her work as a maid for Lady Natasha, so she asked her to excuse her. Natasha herself seemed to be pushing the girl to accept the job with the prince, claiming that it was a good opportunity to finally get ahead. The prince himself claimed that this offer was much better than continuing to work as a maid for the Baldwin family. The prince also added, laughing, that if anyone had heard their conversation, they would have thought he had threatened her. To this, Lady Natasha also laughed and said that she looked like an evil woman who would complain about Liana being discussed with His Highness. For a moment, Liana actually started to get a little worried, but she quickly realized that they were just laughing at her. Even if they denied it, she realized that for them, it was nothing more than an entertainment that had been arranged with the help of a maid. The girl had already learned from her experience, so she realized that in such moments it would be best to just stay quiet and invisible. After finishing her entertainment, Lady Natasha asked the prince if the fourth prince of the royal family, Itala, would join the ceremony, as it was a ceremony to establish diplomatic relations. The prince confirmed this, but he also asked Natasha his name, because he didn't even bother to memorize anyone's name. He assumed that, like the rest of the Itil family, the fourth prince's name would also end in Zilo. The woman was upset that His Highness had forgotten the prince's name again. She was surprised that Ilid was so irresponsible in all his meetings with other families, as he should know at least the name of the prince of the country he was to meet. In fact, the second prince was not supposed to play a big role in this ceremony, as in the rest of the others. His brother was doing the main work, so he didn't have to worry about memorizing all the details. As for his names, he never memorized them, and Natasha missed that this was probably only due to the fact that he only had to memorize male names in his job. He said that he also rarely remembered women's names. He stated that he did not even remember the names of his maids, who had been working for him for 10 years, so he called them all by the name Anna. Lady Natasha also missed that this was quite convenient, because it would be quite problematic to memorize the name of each maid, given that they could change almost every week. A moment later, the woman suddenly suggested that His Highness make a small wager on the name of her personal maid, who was sitting right next to them in the carriage. Now he had to hear her name, and Lady Natasha wanted to see if he would forget it in a month, like the names of the other maids he knew. He was interested in the rate of this offer, to which Natasha replied that then she would forget her name as well. But the woman also noted that a name like Anna would not be accepted. Ilid was interested in this bet, so he gladly agreed without even thinking. Turning to Lady Natasha's personal maid, he asked her name with lightness in his voice and anticipation of his victory. Feeling awkward because Liana was not in this pair by choice, but she could not refuse either, she looked away and introduced herself as Liana Theodore. The prince considered it good luck, because it was very difficult for him to get to know this maid, and the name she gave him was easy to remember. Liana's feet hurt terribly after she put on her new shoes, which matched her new outfit perfectly, but they felt terrible on her skin and left nasty wounds. In fact, she was glad it was only a small wound, so it should heal fairly quickly. And in order for this wound to heal as quickly as possible, Liana had to treat it carefully and give it a break from the horrible shoes. Recalling the prince's words, that Liana's name was easy to remember, she realized that it was always the norm for a master to forget or not remember the names of his servants. There was no need for these formalities, so it was usually the owners who did not even think about such things. Moreover, it also affected their time, which they could have spent on more useful things. On the other hand, maids, as representatives of subordinates who supposedly have the bare minimum of duties, are obliged to remember their master, even if he treated them rudely and disrespectfully, as he did in most cases. This double standard did not give Liana peace of mind because it seemed absurd. The bandage that Liana had put on her injured leg was eventually slightly visible, but she had no choice but to accept it. She could only hope that no one would look under the rather voluminous hem of her dress. Leaving the room, she looked around the street for the entrance to the banquet hall. Her eyes rested on a familiar face that gave her both a positive and negative impression. The owner of this face turned out to be a man whom Liana thought was a parrot from the corridor of the royal palace. They met while the girl was having a little adventure, getting lost, and he left a not-so-pleasant trace in her memories. She could not believe that she had to see him again. She was about to walk across the street and pretend the encounter had never happened, but the man had already seen her and greeted her. Having decided that he would stalk her if she ignored him, she nevertheless decided to answer him with a slightly less than friendly face. A second later, the man abruptly moved in her direction, as if he did not understand the hint with which this greeting was uttered. He was too close, so there was nothing she could do but step back a little. One of her shoes slipped off her foot because she was holding it very precariously, for which reason she could not put it on properly looking at her wound. When she stepped on the soil that covered the piece of land with the magnificent flowers on it, she stumbled and began to fall. An unknown parrot quickly reacted to the girl's fall and managed to grab her before she hit the ground. He quickly managed to get her to the ground, holding her hand firmly so that she could safely put one of her shoes back on her foot. Looking behind her, the girl realized that if this man had not saved her, she would have definitely not escaped a concussion, and that was worse than water. Now her face didn't look so unhappy towards the stranger. She said that every time he helped her, so now she had to repay him somehow. The man suddenly pointed to the hand the girl was holding on her chest, which remained injured after her sudden encounter with Madame Angelique. The man assumed that he left this mark after he grabbed her arm too sharply to save her from falling. The girl said that everything was fine because he only wanted to help her. Trying to understand each other, they could not come to a common vision of the whole picture for a long time, as the unknown man's explanation was not as clear as they would have liked due to his poor language skills. After a moment, the girl assumed that she understood the explanation literally in the hands of an unknown person. She thought he was the person who had accompanied the delegation from Itila. She said that she was glad to meet him and introduced herself as Liana Theodore, the servant of the young lady Natasha of the Baldwin family. The unidentified man thought for a while and also said his name, introducing himself as Arcangelo von Etel. The girl tilted her head slightly to the side, as if trying to understand the meaning of the interlocutor's words, but still could not understand whether his last name was really Etela. She mentioned that only members of the royal or imperial family can use the name of their country as their surname. Recalling Phoebe's words about the different word order in aristocratic language, different from the traditional one, most likely background in the language of Etela, meant from. So the man said that he was Arcangelo from Etila. The girl thanked him for telling her this, and now with a smile on her face, repeated that he could call her Liana.